Welcome to the Deep 404. The conflict in Gaza has continued after a 7-day ceasefire, which was brokered by the help from the Qatari supporters of Hamas, helped to broker a deal where Israel and the Hamas groups agreed to stop fighting for a period of 4 days. That truce was extended twice, but 2 days ago it came to an end. There were reports of some Israeli shootings going on around the 29th of November and some shelling on the 30th. And then the Israeli Defense Forces claiming that about an hour before the extended truce was supposed to end, that the Iron Dome missile defense system detected rockets being launched from Gaza by Hamas. And so an hour later, when the truce was meant to have ended, the Israeli bombing of Gaza recommenced. So there are reports that since that started again, that there have been over 175 Palestinians killed in the renewed bombing. Reports are that bombing is now occurring in southern parts of Gaza. Now, if you recall, initially the Israeli campaign was concentrated on the northern part of Gaza, and the Israeli Defense Force made announcements to the Palestinians that if they wanted to avoid becoming part of the conflict, that they should move to the southern area of Gaza. Now, moving to the southern area of Gaza, obviously for a million people to do this is a big ask. They were given 24 hours, I think, at the time to make that move. A lot of people decided not to move, chose not to move. But the indication was that by moving to the southern part of Gaza, they would be safe there. Now reports coming out that bombing is starting in the southern part of Gaza. So there is some speculation that the Israeli Defense Force is looking to split Gaza into two regions, into a northern and southern region. As I've mentioned before, there is also speculation by some people that ultimately the Israeli goal here is to remove all Palestinians from Gaza in its entirety. At this point of time, there is a challenge there in that neighbouring Egypt does not wish to open its borders and accept and allow Palestinians into the Sinai region and into Egypt. And in a similar way, neighbouring Arab nations, Jordan and Syria, also are unwilling to accept Palestinian refugees from Gaza. Now, this is a complex issue. Obviously, many of the people of Gaza do not wish to leave. They don't wish to be bombed and moved out of that area. They would like to remain there. The concern from Gaza and Egypt is that if they do allow the Palestinian refugees into their countries, that Israel will not allow them back in. And they will have then effectively aided Israel in cleansing the Gaza Strip of all Palestinian inhabitants, which obviously they do not want to see. They do not want to support that. The damage that's being done in Gaza is, of course, large and terrible and devastating. If you haven't seen any of the footage of the destruction of Palestinian apartment blocks in Gaza, there is a wealth of it on all sorts of social media. If you haven't seen it, I suggest that you do see it just to get a feeling for the scale of the attacks. Between the 21st of October and the 11th of November, the Guardian was reporting that during just that period of time, damage was caused to 10 of Gaza's hospitals and health facilities. And of the 10, this was at 11th of November, so a couple of weeks ago, only 2 were still remaining functioning in some capacity. Both of Gaza's paediatric hospitals were now non-functional. The only dedicated cancer hospital and its psychiatric hospital have also become non-functioning now due to the damage that has been inflicted upon those buildings and those facilities. With the truce stopping, Hamas has been reported by Al Jazeera that negotiations on future prisoner exchanges will now not resume until Israel halts its attacks and hands over all Palestinian prisoners. In response, Israel has ordered its Mossad, so Mossad is the Israeli intelligence agency, I guess much like the CIA equivalent. They've ordered their Mossad negotiating team in Doha in Qatar to return because they believe they've reached an impasse with the Palestinians. They did meet with senior Hamas leaders in Qatar last week, and now what happens next? We've had a brief pause or ceasefire for a few days, 7 days. There was some prisoner swapping going on, but now we've just come back to the position where Israel is recommencing its bombing campaign of Gaza, and tensions are beginning to rise and escalate with other Arab nations who decry what Israel is doing to the Palestinians of Gaza. We've also got, again, activity, skirmishes flaring up in the West Bank. Now, remember, the West Bank is the other area of Israel which is Palestinian. The West Bank, while you may think of it as an area, you need to loosely think of it as an area. That entire West Bank area is not Palestinian-controlled land. The area which is known as the West Bank is, I think, something like 60% of that area Palestinians cannot travel to. The Palestinian areas within the West Bank are like an archipelago of islands. They are lots of disparate small areas, some jointly controlled by Israel and Palestine, some controlled by Palestine, some controlled by Israel. But it's not a contiguous block, and that whole area of the West Bank is not Palestinian controlled. But there are skirmishes happening there as well. And so the question now becomes, what will Hezbollah do? Now, Hezbollah stands for the Party of Allah, or the Party of God. They are a Lebanese Shia Islamist political party. They have been led since 1992 by their leader, Hassan Nasrallah. He has come out and spoken a couple of times over the last 6-7 week period since the October 7th Hamas attacks kicked off this latest round of conflict. His comments have been in many areas considered to be surprisingly moderate. Some had thought that he would have come out and called for a Muslim attack on Israel. He didn't. But what will happen with Hezbollah now? Since the fighting has recommenced, there have been at least 3 Lebanese people killed. The Israeli has said that its artillery had struck sources from areas of Lebanon where they were receiving fire from Hezbollah, and that Israeli air defences had intercepted 2 launches of rockets or missiles from within Lebanon. There have been reports of warnings, air defence, air raid, warning sirens in some of the northern settlements of Israel. And Lebanon's national news agency reports that because of shelling by Israel into Lebanon, 2 people were killed in the Lebanese border town of Hula, and 1 person was killed in the village of Jabalia. In an interview with the Lebanese Al Mayadeen news channel on Wednesday of last week, Iran's foreign minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian, he has had 2 visits over the last couple of weeks with Hassan Nasrallah, who is the Secretary General of Hezbollah. He has said this on Wednesday that the Gaza war is likely to spread unless the truce between Israel and Hamas is maintained. Quoting him, "If it does not continue, the conditions in the region will not remain the same as before the ceasefire, and the scope of the war will expand." So this is Iran's foreign minister after speaking with Hassan Nasrallah. There is an Israeli NGO called the Alma Research and Education Center. They have done an assessment of Hezbollah's readiness. Their assessment is that Hezbollah's Radwan unit has some 2,500 fighters. They have already received special military combat training from elements of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. And they believe that they are prepared and ready to invade northern Israel once they are given the green light. And Hezbollah reportedly may have up to 150,000 rockets, and these rockets are capable of reaching anywhere within Israel, reportedly. So we can see that we're getting, after the ceasefire has ended and Israel has chosen to immediately return to its bombing campaign of Gaza, civilian deaths rising again because of this. Iran's foreign minister speaking after meeting with Hezbollah's leadership that things will be different now, that the tensions will rise, that the scope of the war will expand. Now, this may be rhetoric and an attempt to put pressure or bluff Israel into backing down from the current bombing. But if Israel do not, and this isn't just rhetoric and saber rattling, then we're finding ourselves being moved closer and closer to a position where Hezbollah may choose to enter the conflict in a serious manner. Now, if they do, they have this group, the Radwan unit, which are apparently and some level of special combat elite unit, 2,500 fighters prepared, ready to go, 150,000 rockets and missiles, which could be launched at Israel. There has been, of course, spillover also into Syria. Now, Israel has been in war with Syria for some time, but there has been, since October the 7th, a number of missile strikes into Syria, a number of strikes on the Syrian International Airport, another major airport. Reporting in the last day or so is that 2 Iranian Revolutionary Guard members have been killed in Syria after an Israeli attack. They were reportedly operating as military advisors in Syria. The strikes occurred near the capital of Damascus, and they came just within 24 hours after the pause in Israel, the fighting with Hamas in Gaza had stopped. So we see tensions continuing to boil in the West Bank and in Syria and in Lebanon, southern Lebanon, with the very real likelihood that there will be an escalation by Hezbollah at some stage. These ongoing meetings between Iranian foreign minister and Hezbollah's leadership and other Arabic and Muslim leaders within the region, clearly they will be feeling rising pressure to respond and to lend support to their brothers, if you will, as they are perhaps considered, in Gaza. Now, there's also activity from the Houthis in Yemen. They have already hijacked in dramatic fashion one Israeli-linked freighter. I've done an earlier episode on that. Quite dramatic footage of them landing a helicopter on the freighter and then their soldiers disembarking from the helicopter and taking control of that ship. There has been reports that 3 more commercial vessels in the last few days in the Red Sea have come under drone or missile attack from the Houthis. The American destroyer in the Red Sea has reportedly shot down a number of drones or missiles in that area. If we now turn to think of what the support might be like coming from the United States, so there's some interesting developments there. Now, Lindsey Graham, a senator who you may well know of, he was interviewed, and his response when being asked, did he think that too many Palestinian civilians were being killed by the Israelis in the renewed bombing of Gaza, his response was, did the American people worry about how many people died when we destroyed Tokyo and Berlin? So it's not really a measured response from some of the senior political figures in the United States. President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has told the White House, has told reporters that the White House is not now going to seek to place conditions on US military aid given to Israel. Earlier last week, President Biden had told reporters that conditioning the military aid, putting some conditions around how it could be used, was a worthwhile thought, he had said. Now, subsequent to President Biden saying that, Sullivan met with a group of Democratic senators, and after that meeting has come out stating that there will not be conditions put on the military aid. Now, what the conditions were thought to, if the conditions were to be put in place, thought to consist of would be some guidelines around how Israel could use American-supplied weapons and ammunition, and that perhaps the Israelis would have to adhere to any conditions that the Americans themselves felt they should adhere to. However, that now appears to have been thrown out, and aid given to Israel by the United States will now be given without conditions, without restrictions on how it is used. This is going to be a problem of some sort. It's a challenge of some sort for Biden. Now, Biden's getting closer and closer to his November 24 election, less than a year now to that election. We can see already that in Ukraine, the focus is turning away from Ukraine and is turning to Israel. The United States are going to put Ukraine on the back burner. Bill Burns from the CIA has been there to talk to Zelensky and perhaps say to him, build some defenses. You're not going to win this fight. We're not going to give you lots of money. You need to just build some defenses, hold ground until the election is over. And then if we get Joe back in, then we can start to give you more money. So Zelensky has done that, as I mentioned in an earlier video. They may be too late in doing that to some extent, with some areas suffering from the wet and mud season, and digging trenches will be difficult. Having said that, the winter is arriving. There is some very cold weather coming. There are some reports today that some areas through Russia and Ukraine will drop to a peak low of somewhere of 50 degrees below Celsius, even 57 in some areas below Celsius, which is frighteningly cold. And I did see some footage today, which was reportedly of Ukrainian soldiers attempting to dig a trench. As I mentioned yesterday, once the ground does start to freeze, that will become very difficult. And they were struggling to get even a teaspoon of dirt out with their shovel because the ground where they were had frozen. And now just back to Israel before I move on to some Europe and Ukraine news. Israeli casualties are growing too. There are reports now that over 2,000 Israeli soldiers, both men and women, Israel is a nation which does have a large number of women fighting in its army. That over 2,000 of those now apparently have been killed or wounded, requiring some level of medical attention. I imagine this is quite serious, not just sort of cuts and bruises. And the Israeli Defense Force has come out today reporting that 401 of their soldiers have been killed in the fighting thus far. So while there are thousands and thousands of Palestinians being killed by the Israeli bombing, there are hundreds of Israeli soldiers being killed by the Hamas fighters. And while these numbers are smaller, an order of magnitude smaller, they will start to have a political impact on Netanyahu. Now, at the present time, Netanyahu is not really popular in Israel, even though his war with Hamas is considered generally popular by the population in Israel. He himself is not. And so as the tide maybe starts to grow, as people in Israel start to become put off by a growing daily death toll of Israeli forces, pressure will start to mount for him to find a way to stop that. Now, the way to stop that will be to pull those forces out, and then it just becomes carpet bombing of Gaza, which doesn't look good on the international stage, and pressure for Bibi Netanyahu's resignation will no doubt rise. So there's challenges all around there. We're back, as I said, into the situation we were 2 weeks ago before the ceasefire pause occurred. And unfortunately, it's not been able to be sustained. And Israel has gone straight back to bombing Gaza after the ceasefire has paused. Again, it seems like a emotional, heavy-handed response by Israel. People will say that Israel has got every right to do what it wants to remove Hamas. They can have that opinion. What I'm saying is that there could have been a more subtle, clever way to play this. Instead of immediately, when the ceasefire stopped, resuming Air Force launched strikes to destroy apartment blocks, there could have been some subtlety about this. There could have been some additional attempts at negotiation. All of these things would have looked far better on the global stage, would have provided for far more positive PR, which Israel could have used in the foreign press to bolster and stabilize its position. You've got to remember there are a lot of people in the West who are against what's happening in Gaza and what Israel is doing there. If you look at social media, there is a large number of protests going on, which are pro-Palestinian protests. Now, prior to October the 7th, I don't think you would have seen that amount of support for Palestinians. Palestinians. Anyhow, that will be ongoing news, which we'll keep on top of. A little bit of a look at Europe. Now, I spoke a little bit in an episode a day or so ago about Germany and how its political stance on climate change and green energy is causing it to deindustrialize, and how this year it's just announced that it's losing 4,000 or 5,000 jobs in the tyre manufacturing sector, as Michelin and Goodyear are shutting down factories. They're not looking like they're opening those factories up anywhere else now. Goodyear is an American company, but it is closing down a tyre manufacturing plant in Germany. Michelin, German company, is shutting down its tyre manufacturing at 3 sites and moving some of its other operations from Germany into Poland. Now, Germany had a nuclear industry, and until April of this year, it had an operational one. In April of this year, it chose to wind down its remaining nuclear reactors. Interestingly, a group called Radiant Energy Group, they have done a report, and they believe that 8 of Germany's nuclear reactors could be restarted within 3 years' time. Now, 6 of them, they're suggesting, possibly could be restarted within a year. But a key issue they have, and now this is a key issue they have after April, after 6 months of shutting down their last nuclear reactor, key issue is staff. Getting back staff who know how to run nuclear reactors, training people and being confident they know what they're doing, because clearly they've let a lot of these people go. Now, some of these people will be no doubt experienced and of an age where they would now have perhaps retired, taken early retirement, perhaps made redundant, no longer interested in coming back and working in the nuclear energy sector. Some of them may have found other work now which they prefer for any number of reasons. It might be closer to home, it might pay better, it might give them 4 days a week instead of 5, it might be less stress than running a nuclear power plant. So say, once you go and wreck a system, it's very difficult to pull all the components of that system back together to make it work again. And this is the position that Germany find themselves in. So after a 6-month cessation of this activity, already they're now looking at a year before they could get some of these power plants going, and up to 3 years to get more of them going. And a big part of this is finding the right people. Now, I do wonder what logic really was used here in Germany to move away from nuclear energy. And I know that what they say is that they thought that the risk of nuclear catastrophe was too high. I imagine that they will be starting to think that the risk of their deindustrialization may be higher than the actual risk of nuclear energy. I mean, modern nuclear reactors are relatively safe. They're not like Chernobyl. And even, Fukushima, an interesting case on the waterfront. Different topic. We can talk about nuclear energy another day. But the move was predominantly led by the Green Party, who got power in the German elections and who would like to move to renewables like wind and solar. Now, I'm just going to go to the map here because there's one point that I think is an interesting thing, which people often don't consider. Hopefully you can see the map there. If we were to consider the Mühlberg nuclear power plant, which is a 355 megawatt nuclear power plant. If it, and this is coming from Energy Scope, a website Energy Scope, where they have done some math on how many wind turbines you would need to replace that nuclear power plant, the Mühlberg nuclear power plant that generates 355 megawatts of energy, of power. They are estimating, given some factors here like their wind turbines, they have a capacity, but they they don't always operate at their full capacity. They're probably 25% of the time over the course of a year, 25%, they're reaching their maximum capacity. Because there are days when it's just not windy, and there are days when there's a little bit of wind, but it's maybe not enough to turn the turbines. So you don't get your full capacity all the time, as opposed to a nuclear reactor, which just pumps at full capacity all the time, as long as you're doing load balancing outside of the direct area of the network of the generator. So to replace this nuclear power plant, you would need 700 wind turbines. Now, this is Europe on this map, and this is Germany here, and this little dot here, which will expand, is Munich. And so I've just drawn out, just to give an indication of one of the other challenges. While it's easy to say, we'll put 700 wind turbines down, you've got to find where you can put 700 wind turbines down. Now, this is Munich, the city here. This area that's grey is about 15 kilometres across, roughly. Yeah, about 15. And it's in square kilometres, this is an area of 150 square kilometres. That's the area that Energy Scope indicate that you would need to take up and cover with your 700 wind turbines to get them to be operating efficiently and producing the same amount of energy as a nuclear power plant, which, I don't know, probably would fit into a square kilometre or maybe 2 square kilometres, I'm guessing. I don't know. But clearly there are challenges to removing nuclear energy. And now we have a look at Canada. Canada now, because they are a very progressive, modern, postmodern country in their government, certainly. But they have now recognised that if they want to reach their World Economic Forum 2030 targets. They could reach them by 2050, I think, but they're going to do that. Even Canada has now signed on to tripling their nuclear capacity. They have 19 generators at the moment. They are going to triple their capacity. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to triple the number of 19 to have 57 reactors, but triple their nuclear capacity by 2050. So, Germany, it looks like there is a way out. Germany did in 2009, I think it was, actually said, you know what, this idea of us getting rid of our nuclear reactors is a bad idea. And so they said, we're going to stop that. We're going to go back to nuclear power. That lasts until 2011, and then it was voted out again. So no, we're getting rid of our nuclear reactors. So they are where they are now. And as we can see, Michelin is shutting down because energy costs. Lots of energy costs impacting Germany now that they've lost the Nord Stream pipeline and cheap Russian gas, and they're effectively in de facto war with Russia. Having nuclear energy operating, growing the nuclear industry would get Germany out of the energy hole that it's in. Germany is now a net importer of energy, used to be an exporter of energy because nuclear power plants, it's all going wrong in terms of power for Germany. Looks like there is a chance to get out of it, but they need a change of leadership. That change of leadership may come next year in the German elections, and we'll see. Maybe they'll turn it around. Talking of turning things around, President Putin, and so as I mentioned, but I just wanted to cover this off again, President Putin of Russia has just signed a decree to increase the Russian armed forces by 15%. Now, that will move Russia, to 1.3 million people, military people. It's an increase of 170,000 people. Why is he doing this? Reportedly, the reasons are because of the ongoing NATO threat that Russia perceives. Now, today I saw a reporting of an article from French President Emmanuel Macron, and Macron announced that he believed the conflict with Russia would go on for 10 years. Now, if a conflict is going to go on with Russia for 10 years, it is not going to just be Ukraine that is doing that fighting. We've been through the numbers in the last couple of episodes that Ukraine is losing all of its young men. Its average age in the last year has moved from 27, average age of its military, to 43. And that's not because they're taking young men out and keeping them safe and wrapped up in cotton wool. It's because they're dying and losing their limbs and they can no longer fight, and they're being replaced by older men. If there is a war that's going to go for 10 years with Russia, that is going to be a NATO war. And this has been said by President Putin a number of times over the last few months, that their current positioning for Russia is that they are preparing to be able to fight and win a war with NATO. And so this increase now of another 170,000, this is on top of what's already been going on in the stealth Russian mobilization, where reportedly Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has been saying they've been getting 10,000 people a week, 40,000 a month, volunteering to join the Russian army. So NATO expansionism is the cause of concern here, and this is why Russia is growing its army. Now, Norway, Bosnia and Herzegovina are examples of the NATO expansion. They have joined recently. Norway joined in April of this year. I think it was earlier, April, May of this year. Sweden was also meant to join along with Norway, but both Hungary and Turkey are pushing back on that. Now, Turkey is not ratifying Sweden joining NATO because Turkey believes that Sweden is housing members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. They were previously involved in a coup attempt in Turkey, and Turkey consider them to be domestic terrorists. Now, the Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias Billström this week has come out after having having some bilateral meetings with his Turkish counterpart. So this is a Swedish foreign minister. He has come out and said that he was told by the Turkish foreign minister that they expect to ratify Sweden joining NATO within weeks. However, a Turkish diplomatic source has told Reuters, subsequent to that announcement, that the Turkish foreign minister Hakan Fidan did not comment on a timeline for Sweden's accession to the military alliance during his bilateral talks. So, Sweden has made some moves to appease Turkey. Sweden has implemented some laws outlawing the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party within Sweden, and relaxed some arm export restrictions to Turkey, so that Sweden can now export some arms to Turkey if it wants to. However, President Erdogan of Turkey has linked Sweden's NATO accession to Turkey's EU accession. So for a number of years, the idea of Turkey joining the EU has been frozen. I guess Turkey has some concerns the EU has some concerns around Turkey, given its position to proximity to Russia, the relationships that it has with Russia at this present time. While Turkey is a NATO nation, there is some concern that they are not fully on board with NATO. They have looked to buy some S-400 air defense systems from Russia, and this is a concern. The Americans skewered a deal for some F-35s, I believe, that the Turkish were going to buy once they heard that they were looking at getting S-400s from Russia. So that the fact that President Erdogan is the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, there are some challenges to getting into the EU. However, EU's foreign policy chief Joseph Borrell has said that there are still issues to be resolved before Turkey could get into the EU. Now, Turkey may use this and hold this and effectively stop Sweden from getting into NATO until they get into the EU. Turkey is not the only nation which is failing to ratify Sweden joining NATO. Hungary, the Prime Minister Viktor Orban also, he is operating here in unity with President Erdogan and has basically indicated that if Turkey were to say, yes, we'll allow Sweden in, then Hungary would, but Hungary will not allow Sweden in before Turkey. So at this stage, President Putin increasing the size of the Russian army because of the concerns about NATO expansionism and a possible NATO war with Russia in the coming years. French President Macron perhaps hinting at that may be the case without saying so in so many words, with a war going on for 10 years. So British intelligence, Newsweek is reporting that British intelligence is indicating that Russia is now losing an average of 931 men per day. Nearly 1,000 men per day the Russians are losing. This is in contrast to the 776 per day the British intelligence believed that the Russians were losing during the heavy fighting for Bakhmut earlier this year. Now, Newsweek goes on to state that they cannot confirm these numbers which are coming from Ukraine. There are a lot of ifs and likely and can't confirm in the reporting. And they rely upon an example from the Institute for the Study of War. Now, the Institute for the Study of War is a pro-Western institute. And they have noted that they believe that Moscow is likely relying on weaker mechanized capabilities than previous offensive after weeks of brutal fighting, which has led to losses in Russia's weaponry stash and its manpower. What is interesting is that the Institute for War doesn't seem to be able to log into Telegram and have a look at the wealth of geolocated information coming out indicating losses to Ukrainian equipment and Ukrainian manpower. They do, however, the Institute for the Study of War has relied on Oryx reporting. Now, Oryx reporting, if you're not aware, Oryx were an open source reporting group who reported on Ukrainian and Russian losses during this conflict. Now, there were a lot of concerns about the veracity of the Oryx reporting. There have subsequently been some investigations done into it. Now, Weeb from Weeb Union on YouTube, if you haven't seen Weeb's channel, check it out. It's a really good, informative channel, Weeb Union. Weeb, about 3 weeks ago, did a bit of an investigation into this. And Oryx themselves shut down their Twitter channel recently and closing down their reporting. And by all indications, this is because 2 reasons. One, investigation was done into some of the early reporting, which indicates that they were dubiously counting Ukrainian Soviet-era equipment as Russian losses. They were saying, oh, this is a Soviet tank, therefore it's a Russian loss, when in fact many of these were Ukrainian, older Soviet equipment. And this was then badly skewing the counts both of the numbers of Russian losses of heavy and armoured equipment, overcounting that and undercounting the Ukrainian. Also, now that the bulk of the video confirmed and picture confirmed losses that are coming out through in social media and Telegram channels are Ukrainian losses, and many of them are Western pieces of equipment. So the lots of the Ukrainian Soviet-era equipment has been used up, and now what is being hunted and destroyed is Western equipment. And now, obviously, if it's NATO or Western equipment, Oryx can't claim that that is a Russian loss. So these appear to be the reasons that the reality of the situation is sinking in to, at least to those who were running Oryx, and they have now retreated from the public arena because of that. It seems that the reality of the situation is that Ukraine is losing more equipment than Russia is. So British intelligence, again, reporting what appear to be overinflated Ukrainian estimates of Russian losses at nearly 1,000 a day. Again, if this is the case, if Russia is really losing nearly 1,000 a day, then what must the Ukrainian losses be at a time when Russia is advancing across the entire front, when Russia is outmatching Ukraine in terms of artillery pieces and in terms of ammunition for that artillery, when we're getting reports of enhanced electronic warfare capability for the Russians in terms of defending against Ukrainian drones, and when we are seeing advances in things like the Lancet drones and getting video evidence, including the Su-27, which may well have been a decoy, which was destroyed by a Lancet, but that Lancet was striking 100 kilometres behind the front line. So the numbers, if we believe British intelligence, for the Russian losses must be really bad for the Ukrainian losses. My camera's just gone all blurry. Apologies if you're still here. There we go. That should have fixed that. Just one last thing. Yeah, so I did kind of mention this before, but I'll just finish off on this, is that it looks like winter is coming to Ukraine, and in a serious way. Now these are areas in Russia, but these temperatures will drop down, and similar, perhaps not quite this cold, but temperatures will be striking Ukraine. But frost below minus 50 degrees centigrade struck several regions in Russia, and there are reports that in the northeast regions of Russia, temperatures are expected to get down to minus 57 degrees Celsius. That is lethal. If you're getting down to temperatures of minus 20, you can't last long out in that without some form of heating. I don't know. There'll be some study on it somewhere, but I imagine that it's in the hours that you're out in minus 20 if you're not moving, and if you can't get to heat. So this is what is coming to both the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Russians, however, have already built their defensive lines. If they need to fall back, they have those in place. They have growing numbers of men coming to the conflict. The Ukrainians are being pushed back, attempting to build defensive positions now, which they haven't already, it seems, achieved, because they've been focused on Avdiivka and Bakhmut and Marinka, these areas which are just falling to the Russians now. Also, they're going to be going into a winter where the Russians have advanced Lancet capability to strike their ammunition and supply dumps, their supply lines, leaving those frontline Ukrainians without the ability to be reinforced and resupplied in the coming winter months. All right, that's it for tonight. Hey, I want to thank everyone who subscribed. It was a big weekend for the channel over the weekend. If you enjoy this and you've watched it this far, I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please spread the word. If you think you know someone who would like the channel, ask them if they'd like to watch an episode. Thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.